I'm Peter Van Pelt, National Aviation Director, KSA. To my right here is Michael Maloney. Say hello, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Maloney. I'm the manager of KSA's Aviation Planning Group.
And what we're going to talk about today is a presentation that Michael and I gave back in September to the South Texas Transportation Commission, talking about the future of aviation. And this is over that 50-year horizon where you get a lot of credit for making bold assumptions without being held terribly accountable, right?
And that's the way we like it. We like to make bold predictions. We might do that today a little bit and not have to. We will be wrong. We will be wrong. But it is, as we're closing out 2019, that's when we're recording this now, and looking into 2020 and just what might happen over the next 50 years, I think it's just a good time to look at we're kind of at the cusp of a real dynamic change across the board in aviation. So today I think we're going to talk everything from airplanes to airports to even ground transportation.
Right. We're going to talk about the very modest beginnings and where this robust global system has gotten us today. A little bit more about who we are. As I mentioned before, my name's Peter Van Pelt, and I have been crazy about airplanes ever since I could, essentially a toddler, since I could walk, from building models to watching the last of the Connies disappear from the Lambert St. Louis airport and the advent of the F4 and watching the F-15 created there. I've been crazy about airplanes since I can remember. Probably took my first flight about maybe 9 or 10 years old. Had soloed by 16 and was on my way. Michael?
Well, we share a lot of that similar history and passion because airplanes are what usually get most of us excited about aviation.
Right.
I had family in the airlines, grew up watching airplanes, and took my first flight at 15 and private pilot by 18. And so that's where we got you into the industry with airplanes. But as we evolve in the industry and learn about all the different aspects of it, long range planner, we're both long range planners, and so we are always kind of now thinking in a 15, 20 year time frame. So this is kind of neat for us to look at that kind of joy again we caught when we were just getting the aviation bug.
Well, and thinking about your background, I mean, you really come from the technical side of the pilot's perspective, and then you've laid the planner's perspective on top of that, seeing the impacts of aviation. Me, I'm a little different. I started as an airport manager. I did that for 21 years, and I've been a consultant now for 20. So between the two of us, not too boldly speaking, but we've seen a lot of what's gone on.
Yeah, and from different perspectives. So I think that's why today's kind of fun. We'll each take a different angle at it, maybe. But let's go back, like you said, Peter, to that first little hit, because we're going to do a little history here. Not a whole lot, because we're going to look at the future. But that first flight in 1903. Exactly. What comes to your mind when you think about that?
Well, what comes to my mind when I think about that flight was how modest it was, yet how profound it was to the industry. It makes me think of the Neil Armstrong line, one small step for man, one large giant leap for mankind, I believe is a fair paraphrase. When you take a look at that, on our screen, we're actually talking about a video or a PowerPoint presentation that we presented. And so we will do our best to refer to these slides as we go through to keep our audio listeners with us. One of the things we're looking at is literally a marker of the beginning and end of that first flight. 852 feet, so modest, under a minute in duration, 59 seconds. Yet, it set the stage for everything.
Well, and that iconic photo that you see there of the Wright Flyer, with the brothers there looking at that flight, that's what kind of gives you that inspiration of where you can go from that one point. Because to me, when I look at that, Peter, you look at that, couple 10 feet off the ground that he is at that point.
Right.
And to me, it's like that is it. That was the first time we're able to break the bounds of the earth and kind of go from there. So to me, you look at what the Wright Flyer was at top speed of 30 miles an hour, only had a 40-foot wingspan and about 600 pounds, to where we are today and where we're going to go in the future. It's amazing the last 100-plus years where that's come.
When you look at this airplane, and when we're thinking about it here, the fact that they even got this airplane off the ground, it weighed 600 pounds is a lot of weight. And that doesn't look like the most efficient airfoil, and I'm sure that engine was puny and anemic as all get out. The fact that they got it off the ground weighing, a quarter of a ton is pretty impressive.
It is, absolutely. And then you look at, kind of where we went from that point, and we're going to do a quick timeline here, Peter, but that was 1903.
1903.
And then just 20 years later, we're looking at Lucky Lindy flying across the Atlantic. I mean,
Right.
that's a short time frame. And then you go to 39, you get your first jet propeller aircraft.
Right. And I'm sure that, if I recall this properly, that was actually some of the deep skunk worksy sort of things by the Nazi engineers during World War II. Wartime stuff going on there. And then
60s, yeah.
Yeah, and before we go past 61, let's think about this. The very first flight or the commercial flight of the 707 was 1958 when Pan Am was flying it. So you can see the advent of and we are describing the advent of the jet age between 39 happening in 58, and by 61, 60 or 61, we're already talking about space travel.
It's amazing. And then right at the end of that decade, you're looking at the first flight of the Concorde.
So let's look at that decade of the 60s. It's just amazing. Or even going back when you take a look at 1903 to 1970, how much happened in that first 70 years. It's just amazing.
Well, and then you go into the latter part of the century, and again, we've got space exploration even further here with the Apollo 11 moon landing.
Right, in July, right.
And then you get right after that in 1970, the first Boeing 747 commercial flight. And then, now we're looking at the next boom in the modern jet age and large transport aircraft.
Well, and one of the things we're looking at here is a mark in 1986, and one that we could have just littered this timeline with so many great events. But let's also remember the first flight of the space shuttle was in 1981 during that time. And I remember one of the lines we have up here is a 1986 mark for the first nonstop flight around the world by Dick Rutan and Paula Yeager. Or excuse me, I think it was Dina Yeager. I don't think it was Paul. I think her name is Dina Yeager. But I remember seeing that airplane. I saw that airplane at Oshkosh when it got back. It was the most amazing thing to make it around the 25,000-mile globe.
Well, going from that 800 feet we just talked about in 1903. Again, it happens so fast. And then you get into the late 90s and you get the space station, and we're looking at even solar flights in 2016. And one thing we didn't have on this particular timeline, but was the last flight of the Concorde. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that was 2003 in October. And so a lot happened really between that 1990s, and we've got you'll talk about it a little bit too, but the Boeing's 777 came online in those areas, and so it's just amazing how our reach now. We always talk about aviation being a global industry,
right?
But it's now we're transitioning with space flight and everything else. I mean, it's with commercial space flight is
And one of the things we're going to talk about is how efficiency is really ruling the day versus gross gains in speed or all those sorts of things. The longest flight in the world right now is from Newark to Singapore. It's 18 and a half hours. How long is that, Michael?
9,500 miles, yeah. That's on the
amazing.
Airbus A350, but that's just a good way to cap that discussion off with the Wright brothers flight. Here you are in 2019, and now you're crossing almost the entire world in one flight.
And that A350 holds between 315 and 369 passengers, and it weighs almost 700,000 pounds fully loaded. That's absolutely amazing.
It is. And, a lot of this has been the technology and the propulsion, and we'll talk about that too, but composite technology, the aircraft itself has changed so much.
It has.
That gives us that ability to really to reach a little bit further. And so as we look at closing out 2019, what are some of the things that come to your mind, Peter, about, where are we today? What are some of the trends that you think about?
Well, I think clearly, as we teased before, efficiency is driving the industry. And that's just something that's not going to stop. As long as there are economics involved and people are stretching dollars, that is absolutely going to continue.
Well, and there's been a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we've had a good record. If you look at 2019 and even the year before in 2018, we had record-setting numbers for passengers and enplanements and traveling passengers, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in where the market goes, which is kind of why looking in 2020 as a short-term future is a little bit uncertain. We've got, we've talked about the global market as a whole, the Asian market, the Chinese trade deals, things that have been affecting that.
Right.
Cargo is starting to lag a little bit in air cargo, which is usually a leading indicator of global
stability and economic prowess. Yeah.
And passenger travel. And we've really looked, the last trend that I think we look at is automation, digitalization, and just we're on the cusp of so many things changing. Whether it's augmented reality,
Absolutely.
there's just so much there. So it is uncertain, and that's why I think we get to sit here and make some bold predictions that
And
may or may not be right.
I'm much more comfortable talking about what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years rather than talk about what's going to happen in 6 months.
Exactly.
You know. And I like to go back to some truths that we hold that may or may not be true. And for me, it proves the point of how efficiency is ruling a day. And I'm talking about the efficiency that brings financial gain to the operators of aircraft and airlines and those sorts of folks that are trying to make things more effective for them and increase their bottom line. The airlines are absolutely glued to the prognostications and the desires of Wall Street for earnings. Airlines are now investment grade opportunities. They're no longer cheap stocks. They're making money hand over fist.
Well, it's funny that we talk 50 years. There's no decisions, like you just mentioned, in airlines especially. Everything is the next quarter.
Yes.
How much money is going to be made in the next
exactly
quarter
right.
so that you can project. So the airlines and business as a whole is looking so short term now. It's tough to take that longer look and really see what's really going to be happening down the line.
Oh, that's exactly right. And increased speed or efficiency is the slide that we're looking at on the screen now. And we show the profile of a 707 with a cruise speed of 525 knots. And we show the Boeing 777. Now, which airplane do you think's faster, Michael?
Well, you would think a modern jetliner that is still in operation today with the increased engine technology we have since 1958 would definitely be the 777, would it not?
Well, you would certainly think so. But the 777 actually is 15 knots slower than the Boeing 707. In fact, they used to say in the day, I had a good friend who was a Lear 23 driver. And he said, I could outclimb those guys all day long. But once they got up on the step, they just leave me in the dust. Well, very fast, beautiful airplane.
And you look at what the difference is over a long-haul flight, and it is. The money is going to, at this stage in airlines, the money aspect and the efficiency is more important than the extra hour or two or less in some cases that you might get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you another example of that. We think the newer jets, the faster they're going to be. Do you know that the F-4 actually has a faster maximum and max cruise speed than the F-16 or the F-18?
That's amazing. It's you wouldn't think that normally. It's counterintuitive.
Right. It's the intercept mission has changed. Like nothing is going to accelerate like the F-15 or the F-22, which each can exceed their own weight and vertical acceleration as they're flying. But for most of the aircraft out there, newer doesn't necessarily mean faster. In fact, the airlines are slowing down their aircraft in the guise of efficiency, trying to make a little more money on each flight that they might be taking.
Exactly. Well, and that goes to show that the industry has kind of been hard to predict, which is why our job today is it's fun actually. It's more fun to sit here because you know it's hard to predict. But you look back at satellite-based navigation. I mean, and you've got a story, Peter, I know about an example of people not really believing that it was always going to transition from ground-based navigation to satellite-based.
Yeah, I remember this was maybe 1982, maybe 1983. Was at the National Airports Conference back when it was held in Norman, Oklahoma. And a guy from the FAA was talking about terminal navigation aids. He was talking about instrument landing systems and what was coming in the future. And this bright young gentleman in the audience stood up and he said, "Isn't there a possibility, and don't you think that likely in our future we will see satellite-based navigation because of the satellite array that surrounds the globe?" And this guy from the FAA couldn't have been more dismissive of this poor guy and said, "No, it'll never happen in my lifetime." And look, we're completely dependent on satellites, and that's exactly where we should be going. That was dead wrong in 1983.
And it is.
And the poor guy kind of sunk back down in his seat all dejected, and he was as good as Nostradamus with that one.
Yeah, right. And because things happen fast, and I remember, we've talked about transcontinental supersonic flight and how, we thought that was definitely going to be the wave of the future. And we just talked the Concorde at its last flight, over a decade ago. Hasn't necessarily made a comeback. We'll talk about that. But biofuels, very light jets. I remember just the turn of the 2000s when we were thinking very light jets were going to just
They were going to be the deal.
skies.
That's exactly.
They black in the skies, and then they were going to be cheap, under $1 million,
Right.
and all that stuff, but
Right.
still have jet, and that's just not been
Yeah.
the case. Drones has obviously been, an unmanned aircraft has been the next real big change that we've seen, and how we've been able to adapt for those things. This list could go on and on.
It goes
Talk
on and
about biofuels, glass panel, flight decks, but it just goes to show what we thought was going to happen even a decade or 2 decades ago is always changing.
Have you seen that popular meme on Facebook where they show the pretty stewardess coming down the aisle, probably in the Lockheed Constellation, with this cart, and these beautifully prepared steaks, and everybody
Meals.
is in their nicest
Their best,
dress, sitting
yeah.
in the chairs and being served. And they said, well, if it's this great in 1958, how great's it going to be in the future?
And now we're sitting in our pajamas with our headphones on and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's interesting how we fly these days.
Yeah.
But,
And we're trying to remember some of these things that we're talking about here. Michael, I honestly can't recall if we have another slide that's going to prompt us on this.
well, I think that's a good point. I didn't either. I'm going to say that. It's what does the future hold? We don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
where we are. Well, I think
Yeah.
we would like to make a couple bold predictions that we think might be something that at least be. What I've tried to do in my mind is take things that are starting to happen now,
Right.
and then see, okay, go beyond that.
Right.
What's really going to be the catalyst for a dynamic change that, we're at since the jet age, I don't think we're at a new frontier where it's really going to change fundamentally the entire industry.
Yeah.
So what does it hold? We don't know. We're going to walk through a couple
Yeah.
doors, maybe.
I just had a thought, Michael, and a couple of these things that we were talking about on the prior slide, I'd like to drill down on just a minute. We talked about very light jets and the promise, and it was going to be an under $1 million proposition. One of the things that we talked about before we discussed this topic was, well, they had planned to use the engines on the cruise missile to power this aircraft. Great thrust to weight ratio, makes a lot of sense, could easily power this very light aircraft, only has 4 or 5 people inside, pure jet travel. What they failed to remember was the engine on a cruise missile only has to start one time.
Yeah.
So when you start factoring, this has to withstand repetitive starts and stops and so many cycles on the gear and everything else. The whole value proposition changes with the very light jet.
Absolutely,
And
it
as
does.
much as excited as we were about that airplane, it was really all about the economics didn't pan out. And we could say the same thing about the Concorde. You take a look at the Concorde, and as you said, its last flight was in 2003. It did start flying in 1969. Then they had that horrible crash that happened in July of 2000 on the flight from Charles de Gaulle to JFK. And it really wasn't the airplane's fault. It was a piece of FOD that was left on the runway, and that's foreign object damage, or debris right on the runway that was kicked up into the fuel bladder and wound up causing that crash. But what it did do, in perception ruling reality, it started to erode the traveling public's acceptance and confidence in that airplane. And so it stood down for an entire year. In fact, right after 9/11, poor timing again, it started flying in November, and it was out of service by 2003.
Very short time, and that shows that all those, and when we do forecasting in our planning work, right, that there's all these outside dynamics that influences not only just the aviation industry, but the global economy that you can't predict.
No.
You just can't predict it.
No.
So something like that happens, and it changes the entire course of where some of these technologies are going. So I think that's why this is fun. Here's some of the things that we're going to make predictions on.
So are you ready?
Thinking about, let's do it.
Let's start making some bold predictions.
Let's do it. I think you might have the first one there.
Yeah. I really believe that commercial passenger aircraft are going to fly right past supersonic flight. And I'll tell you why I believe this. Let's take a look at several of the things that are going on. It was economics that really caused the downturn or the death knell for the Concorde that was flown by British Airways and Air France. And there are so many things on the horizon. We're going to talk about suborbital trips. We're going to talk about hypersonic flight. We've got a couple videos that we're going to show and we'll be able to listen to on the podcast side that are going to show just what right on the horizon, right at the cusp of the horizon. And I think it's the people where time absolutely equals money. It's corporate aviation where I believe the supersonic travel is going to re-engage itself in the proposition.
Well, and you talked about the Concorde too, and the efficiency gained and the cost. So now, because we're looking at being able to make commercial space travel a reality, and so when I think you talk hypersonic versus you're going right past. We can't really make the money at supersonic that we need. We can probably go past that with supersonic and make that just or hypersonic, excuse me, and get you up to space and back in what, a day? I mean, it's pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing, and as you'll see through in this video that we're going to show you here, and you'll hear on the video that we're going to be presenting, is it's really all about engine technology. After Mach 5, things get kind of sketchy about how much air you can get through an engine.
Yeah, you want to try to run. We've got a video, and hopefully this will work out on the.
We're keeping fingers crossed here, folks.
Boeing has finally unveiled a successor to the legendary Blackbird SR-71 spy plane, capable of traveling at 5 times the speed of sound.
Dubbed the son of Blackbird, the new aircraft is being touted as a successor to the legendary Blackbird SR-71 spy plane. Retired in 1990, the SR-71 still holds the record as the fastest manned plane ever built. Boeing's end goal with this new aircraft is one that can travel at Mach 5. Boeing unveiled the design at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics Sci-Tech Forum. And while the twin-tail tapered wing concept hasn't yet been approved for full-scale development, Boeing insists the son of Blackbird is a feasible design.
In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait. Behold the future, the future, the future.
I think that wraps up that one a little bit. And you're just looking at that, watching, and listening to it. It's pretty amazing.
It's pretty exciting, and you can see how complex the equation has become.
Well, and taking that from the next step even to really looking at even suborbital travel and point to point, we talk about, of course, what SpaceX is doing and everything else. And it's the technology that I think is available on a commercial side versus the, again, we're talking even about corporate business travel.
Absolutely. Right? And this is the fast one. I mean, this is the one that I've been excited about for so very long, because this is really where you go suborbital. It's a big parabellum that you'll go from your initial takeoff point in New York, and you'll go up into the atmosphere, way up into the suborbital space, and come right down in Tokyo. And you'll do it in an hour and a half.
Yeah, that hour and a half, that's amazing.
Yeah,
right?
it's just amazing. That's almost like Beam Me Up, Scotty.
Exactly. You want to walk? Maybe we'll go through this video real quick. So, Peter, I'll help narrate and voice over here for those that can't see this video. But this is SpaceX's point-to-point demonstration of suborbital. It's their concept video, and they're showing people boarding in New York to Shanghai, which is a distance of 7,000 miles, and it says travel time of 39 minutes. And so this concept's actually showing a ferry kind of moving out to a rocket launch facility out in the inner harbor there of New York City, kind of looking at a very small platform. People are boarding over a crossing bridge, getting onto this. Really, it's a rocket, a SpaceX rocket, and it's taken off. And so now it shows going through that what looks to be suborbital layer, and it's pretty neat to watch because you get above the animation they use, gets above the Earth's curvature. You can see that, and they drop a rocket from there. They're showing a max speed of 27,000 kilometers per hour, kind of going around the globe in that very low orbit around the globe, and then the other side of the world in Shanghai, and they're coming in for a vertical landing. And I know they've demonstrated this in the past Total flight time there from New York to Shanghai they show is 39 minutes. And, now they're showing different scenarios that they're doing Hong Kong, LA to Toronto. And so some of in Tokyo to Singapore, London to Dubai, all in 29 minutes to 30 minutes. And they're going through just a variety of these different trips. And it says the most long distance trips are less than 30 minutes, and anywhere on Earth in under an hour.
Absolutely. When you're traveling 27,000 kilometers an hour, it doesn't take long.
No, and it's crazy to think about that in doing business in that type of a global reach in that time. I mean, you could literally go have a meeting in Tokyo and be back before dinner.
Absolutely.
And be able to get that done. And that's, to me, that's the game changer there. And then you look at the infrastructure supported to do that. These are landing vertically. I mean, that changes the entire infrastructure needs that you have. So it's pretty amazing. And then when you look at just the business, maybe the supersonic even.
And we have a slide pulled up here where we're talking about the next concept for supersonic travel, which will likely hit the corporate community. And this is where we think, at least I think, I'm not sure.
This is your bold prediction.
Yeah,
I can't vouch for it.
I'm saying that this is where we're going to see supersonic travel again. We're going to see, New York to Cape Town. We're going to do that in 9 hours and 56 minutes instead of 13 hours and 35 minutes. We're going to see New York to Dubai, 9 hours and 33 minutes instead of 11 hours and 56 minutes. You're saving 3 or 4 hours on the trip legs, and that's going to make a big, big difference. That's not flying quite as fast as the Concorde, but it is flying about Mach 1.3, and that's really speedy. That makes more sense economically to me than the other propositions do.
Well, at least in the near term, absolutely. And that's where you're going to put time above business travel. Is all about time.
Time equals money.
Exactly. And so there you're looking at the economics don't quite have to make the most sense on a bigger scale with commercial traffic. But this one you're describing, the AS2, I think it's gone through Airbus and now it's been purchased, I think, by a couple other different it was the Ariane AS2, Ariane Corporation, and now Airbus has picked it up recently. And
which was smart for
so,
them.
You look at where these are going, and I think the program cost on something like that was about $4 billion and $120 million a jet. But that's exactly right. It's probably going to go ahead and first launch from this point again. I don't think you're going to see it back commercially first. Absolutely. So I agree with you on that prediction for sure. I guess I'll move into my first one. Well, this is yours, actually, isn't it? You've got another one there.
I'll make this very quick. I have another bold prediction that says it's going to be a very long time to see commercial aircraft hold 1,000 passengers, if ever. We thought that's the way it was going. We were absolutely certain in the 90s that that was going to happen. But take a look, the A380 is being retired. This aircraft that was supposed to be able to be expanded to hold 800 passengers has not reached its potential. There were 200 aircraft that were sold of the A380. It's operated by 13 airlines. Now let's contrast that with the Boeing 777. 1,400 of those have been sold, and over 60 airlines fly them. And they're really not that much difference in terms of the number of people that they can carry. Well, 396 to 500 passengers for the Boeing 777, which is 512 for the A380. But in the scheme of things, adding an additional 777 is a lot more efficient than bringing in an A380. And this is what's going on. The 747's being retired with these new engines. This Trent 8000 engine has 95,000 pounds of thrust. It's just amazing.
Well, and I remember discussions when the A380, when Airbus was looking at this thing, and Boeing was kicking ideas around. There was competition there, and I think there was a lot of discussion at the time, thinking, well, this will never work. And Airbus kind of went down that line of, well, we're going to prove that wrong. We think it can, but then they largely depended on a singular foreign carrier. I think Emirates was the largest that had the fleet, and then when it no longer made sense to them, those low delivery numbers, that killed it. And again, it boils back down to economics, right? And so we proved that you can use an aircraft to do this, but right now it's just not financially as feasible as they thought. So I think a lot of people saw this one coming, I guess.
Right.
But once it was successful, at least initially in operating, I think it kind of came to a quicker end than we all expected.
Yeah, much quicker. And it was cool to be able to say, well, we can just like ships, airplanes are going to get bigger, and that's where the efficiency is going to come in. But it just hasn't proved that way. Now, what do you know? Tomorrow, something's going to drop.
It will change.
It's going to be an
That's
absolute
for sure.
game changer. But as of today, it makes no sense.
It doesn't. And as you go to the next one, would it be the blended wing technology that
Right.
might drop next? I don't
Right.
know.
And the great thing about the blended wing technology, as we're viewing this slide on the screen, it's got a couple primary drivers. It's very fuel efficient by the shape of the airfoil, and its noise signature is very low, again, by the shape of the airfoil and the position of the engines. But its challenges are, how do you get passengers out of this big wedge-shaped boomerang-looking thing? It's difficult to manufacture because of all the blended surfaces in the aircraft, and it's even more difficult to establish it as a pressure vessel, because pressure vessels are easiest when they're big
tube,
cylinders.
It's a cylinder tube, yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where we've seen this vision on this particular slide of this large triple-decker blended wing. You know, it's been floating around for years. I know that different manufacturers have gotten pretty close to it, but I think you described that threshold.
Right.
And that's that
Right.
800 to almost that 1,000 point
Right.
passengers, where the threshold just does not seem to make a lot of sense to cross necessarily at this point. So I would agree with you on that prediction. I think that we probably just won't get there, especially if you look at the efficiencies of the other technologies that you're looking at.
And things that we weren't even able to forecast a few years ago.
Exactly. Okay. All
Okay,
right, my
Michael,
turn.
tell
My
us.
turn. Okay, so I'll take a little bit away from the aircraft environment. Let's go to something that we all, especially we're doing this close of the holiday season here in 2019. So travel, and a lot of people have been traveling, and so you think airport security and the pains of traveling through the airport these days.
Right.
And so I believe that the advancements in technology at the airport security screening point will virtually eliminate passenger waiting and discomfort, at least as we know it in the post 9/11 era, and
Right.
particularly the last probably 5 to 10 years, which really gotten painful because we're at an all-time high of passengers, and we still have the same screening technology, largely the same screening technology, at least in the last 5 years, and waiting times in TSA lines. I mean, that's what everybody complains about. But when you think about TSA requirements, and I'll talk about two different things that I think will change this. I think you and I are both pre-check, TSA pre-check. And so you look at what the screening point can be improved upon.
Right.
But you also have the verification step. When you look at a screening, when you walk in,
The whole
in line,
queue, yeah.
the queue, you've got your verification step first,
Right.
where people have to get in line, you say who you are, or verify who you are, and that you have a ticket. And you've seen companies like Clear that are now using, bio thumbprint recognition, things like that, bio screening, so that you can quickly identify and get through that line. Then you have the screening piece, and that's where pre-check comes in. So you can be
Right.
faster in the screening as well as the verification step. So if you have both of those, you're getting through your security checkpoint pretty happy and pretty quickly. And then, TSA is already, we're looking at here technology, Apex Screening at Speed. They have put, mandates and programs in place to really enhance the technology on the TSA side and try to get 300 passengers per lane per hour in throughput. So
And I have no doubt whatsoever they're going to get there.
it will happen. And we look at some of the technologies that they're looking at. I mean, CT scanning has been around for a while, but they're using that. You look at the millimeter wave technology where you can walk through and very quickly screen the passenger itself. We've already started using a lot of these things. It's really the combination, in my opinion, of all of those in a comprehensive implementation strategy.
Exactly.
And then you start looking at facial recognition and everything else, and now you're going to walk through an airport and you may not even touch anything and just walk through, and you're verified, you're screened, and you're on to your gates all in one.
What's
very
that Arnold movie where he tries to go through the screening and it shows he's got the guns on him? Was it Total Recall?
I think it was Total Recall, which was maybe one of the 80s, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
so-
going to be a Total Recall scenario before you know it.
You look like what we thought it was going to be like.
Right.
So it is. And it's getting that way now. I mean, facial recognition is already happening. We know that. I think, we've mandated that we should have almost every international checkpoint by 2022 covered. But DFW is doing it. They're wanting to expand to 75 gates by 2020. American Airlines uses it on its passenger travel for international flights. Now, the big challenge here is not the technology, Peter. I mean,
Right.
we know that it's the comfort level with a lot of the privacy concerns that I think most of us have at least thought about. What are you doing with my face after you use it to board? And so, to me, we've got more of a social challenge than we do technology challenges on this, but it's already being implemented, and it's going to be required at some point. I think it's something we're just going to have to get comfortable with.
Yeah, and they're stepping through that very quickly. I'm surprised how quickly TSA is able to work their way through some of those privacy concerns. Some of the privacy concerns that came from the first level of screening, an automated screening, they fixed immediately. That's going to carry on for years. Just having the avatars of people going through those things rather than an actual body image have answered so many of those questions. They're just going to carry that on forward.
And that's the good news. Bad news is we've got all-time high in travel, but we're still at that discomfort point, I think, and I think it's about to change. I think we will see, especially in the next 50 years, where that becomes a lot easier with that.
What else you got up your sleeve, Michael?
Well, it's all technology based again, but my next bold prediction would be that a large part of the aviation, particularly the aircraft fleet, will be all electric. And even some regional airlines. I know particularly we're going to see general aviation aircraft go that way.
20 years ago, I would have told you you're full of crap.
Well, you even challenged me when we first put this up. Yeah. I think you said, really, has battery technology come that far? And it has. It's amazing. Has. And you look at some of the drivers for this, and the International Air Transport Association, we look globally at kind of reducing the CO2, and we talk about carbon neutral a lot too, but just even reducing that by 50%. And they've got a 4-pillar strategy where you look at new technology, you look at more efficient aircraft operations, you look at infrastructure improvements. So it's not just a one solution that's going to fix at least the global carbon footprint. But when you look at the aircraft component of it, we go from everything from hybrid electric to full electric.
Right.
And one example of those is Airbus on the hybrid standpoint is the Airbus EFAN X or 10, and its first flight is already scheduled for 2021. So that's a regional type of airline.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening and not able to see the presentation, we've got essentially a BAE 146 up on the screen that they've retrofitted for the EFAN X series. It's amazing.
Yeah, and you're looking at in that particular example, they've still got 3 out of the 4 as jet aircraft,
right?
Traditional jet engines, but they've got the one kind of generator power system, and one of the engines is replaced with an electric motor,
right?
And so that's it's a true hybrid technology, and so at an aircraft that size, I mean, you're already looking at implementing that in the next couple of years, which is pretty amazing.
First flight in 2021.
Yeah. Now, if you go a step below that...
This is the one that blows my mind.
We'll show you a short video here in a second, too, for those that will be watching. But it's the Alice Commuter aircraft. And this one debuted in 2019, I think, at the Paris Air Show. It's made by Aviation. And they're looking at a service around 2022. But it's 9 passengers, is 650 miles range at about
650 miles on battery power.
On batteries
at over 200 knots.
Exactly, at over 240 knots. So this right here will actually change a lot of your short-haul regional airline travel, potentially.
It's a complete game changer.
Yeah, let's take a look at the video. And I'll do my best here again, Peter, to kind of narrate the screen for those that can't see this. And I encourage everyone listening to the podcast to go look up some of these videos online because it's hard to describe. But this Alice Commuter really looks like a larger V-tail Bonanza, so to speak. It has the V-tail. It's got 3 pusher props, 2 on each outward wing and 1 in the back of the fuselage. But it can seat 9 passengers. It's an unpressurized cabin at this stage that they're demonstrating. But it's a very sleek, composite-built aircraft. And it just goes to show you what the next small commuter looks like, which you would be, right now with piston-driven or even turboprop aircraft. This is kind of what that is, and it's all composite construction. So like we talked about, Peter, this is a much lighter airframe, so the batteries, the weights are not necessarily the limiting factor anymore, and I think you'll probably see them come down, like we said, over time anyway. But the battery does account for that 60% of the max takeoff weight. So again, just a really sleek-looking airplane, and expected service in 2021. So as that one wraps up, one of your first points there, Peter, to me is still valid to some degree. It said 60% of its maximum takeoff weight is attributed to the batteries.
Right.
So it is still a limiting factor, the battery technology, but they are becoming lighter. And I think what you and I have talked about is that it's not necessarily the battery technology that's driving this ability. It's the airframe and the composites technology that has allowed the entirety of the rest of the aircraft to get lighter. So now the batteries
can compensate for the
exactly
right.
And I think eventually they'll both line up where you're really getting lighter in both areas. So,
well, my next prediction, bold as it is something's got to give with comfort on commercial aircraft.
Amen.
And this is really more a bitch of my own personally. It may not be in the next 50 years, but something absolutely has to change.
Yeah, we get talking about how uncomfortable it is to fly, especially on packed airplanes, because we're at an all-time high in load factors, right?
They're crazy.
So you got more people on there.
Driven by Wall Street, actually brutal efficiency management and capacity management by the air carriers to get every passenger on every flight they possibly can. Although those airplanes will hold 100% of their people, you're not very comfortable at 100% of the seats being filled. You know, who thinks commercial airlines flying's fun? Not me, not you.
Not like it used to be.
Not like it used to be. They're no longer pushing that cart down the aisle with the steak on there saying, how do you like it cooked? Airlines are squeezing absolutely every penny. Air rage much? I mean, it's no wonder. In fact, I'm surprised somebody hasn't gone absolutely apoplectic yet.
Well, I just saw
did it happen already?
I just saw one posted within the it was a international flight. I'll forget the destinations, but posted a video online and it dealt with a flight attendant and a passenger getting in a very heated discussion. So and these are happening more often, especially now that we have social media and you can capture these on your cell phone. But we're at a boiling point, I think, right? Every time you're on that airplane, you're just hoping that everybody behaves and gets there safely.
And this is what I'm really hoping happens in commercial air traffic. If we move on to our next slide here, we get excited about the conceptual developments in airfoil, airframe technology, propulsion, but some of those also have to come. Some of those advancements also have to come inside the aircraft. I think the beginning that we were seeing out of that are some of the benefits that we find on the Dreamliner, the 787, with the lower altitude in the cabin and the greater humidification inside the cabin makes that long-term flight a lot less stressful.
Just help on your jet lag, and I think it's the whole thing. Flying is part of it, but then you're on those long flights, you're affected days after you get off the airplane.
Absolutely. And one of the things we're looking at here is a concept of pods inside an aircraft that make for more club seating and a less stressful environment. We're going to roll a little video here.
Yeah, Peter, this one's by the AIRBUS group. Originally, again, a very visually appealing animation here, but it talks about what if we rethought airplane interiors to create a new kind of experience and turning each flight into a personalized journey. And this is their concept of what that would look like as a redefined passenger experience. And to your point, they're showing, a wide-body aircraft here, a freighter that they kind of reimagined from tail to nose, they say, with a system of modules that can be effortlessly interchanged, basically belly cargo modules that you would see. And they're demonstrating how you could reconfigure those with basically anything you want. I mean, you could put in sleeping areas, you could put in cafe areas, you could put in the really neat thing that they're going to show here in a minute is of course I have kids. I have two little girls, and when we travel, they've got a little kids play area in some of these that would be just amazing to have in each one of these compartmentalized basically cargo area capsule modules that you could easily load. What they're showing here is demonstrating how they could easily load it the way they traditionally load air freighters, and bring them up and put the modules in and use the same type of latching and lifting system that are already in a lot of freight aircraft. And it says seamless cabin customization in every flight. So they could just basically rearrange this from shopping to sleeping to dining to a play area all throughout the fuselage, kind of on the fly. So it's very radical. And it's really the future of flight and the way they can demonstrate changing things on the fly for that. So this one is totally something new, and I haven't seen anything quite like it.
And the next thing that we're going to look at here is that dreaded, hated middle seat. I mean, I'm not a little guy, I don't like that middle seat.
Armrests in the middle.
Those armrests are mine if I'm in the middle. Well, here's a great almost immediate solution. Let's widen that seat out to 20 inches instead of 18 and offset it by setting it back about 4 inches so shoulders don't touch.
A little stagger.
That little stagger, that one, or those refinements to that middle seat could knock air rage right in the head. At least give us a lot more than what we're getting today. If you're going to give us these high capacity aircraft with the low or the high pitch in between seats, you've got to give us
out somewhere.
Help us somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that there's some pretty innovative ideas, and if that were to happen, that would help a lot.
And then
you don't want to go to this, right? There's been some really unique ideas floated.
Absolutely,
in the past, right?
and what we're looking at here is we're looking at a row of seats here that essentially have a saddle that you straddle.
Stand up.
There's stand-up seating on the airplane. It sounds great for the carriers, but I'm not sure it's so great for us.
Well, that was floated,
So no seat at all?
in Europe, right? You got
Yeah.
short-haul flights, the
Right.
low-cost carriers, and
Right.
hey, what if we all just stood up and you could pack more people in? But yeah,
something
hopefully it doesn't go that way.
absolutely has to give, and I think we're getting there.
Yeah, and I think everyone will hope that prediction comes true pretty quickly. So I'll shift a little bit out of the airplane and out of the air and make a bold prediction on the ground. And I think that as we've seen advancements in ground transportation, I think it'll all but eliminate very short-haul regional airline flights and air travel demand. And particularly in our region of the country here in Texas, in the Southwest region, where we have a lot of ground to cover in one state economy, and there's a lot of mode competition.
Right.
I mean, that's where we fight with, especially small and non-hub airports, is keeping airline service because it's so easy to get in your car and drive certain distances.
And let's face it, we're a driving population.
Society, absolutely. Yeah. And so when you look at things, and especially here in the state of Texas, high-speed rail has been on the horizon for a number of years, just starting to clear a lot of those environmental hurdles that took a while, and we're really on the verge of implementation. And in Texas, as an example, looking between Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth. And so, that to me is the biggest, and always has been, mode choice in those routes has been the threat to the airline demand. But when you start looking at getting somewhere, in Houston an hour and a half or 2 hours, cutting that almost down, by the time you go and wait at an airport, get through security, at least in today's age, you're going to get there quicker. You're going to get there, you don't have to, they won't stop. They're not going to make stops. It's a direct flight, basically, without having to get off the ground. And the fares on these are going to be competitive, actually probably cheaper than airline tickets today. And so I think you're going to see a lot of those in the state of Texas, and particularly be threatened by these alternative modes as they come online in the next 5 and 10
And the
years.
high transit corridors will also see.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of business there. And so that's just one that's been very popular in this area. And then, let's look at Virgin Hyperloop 1, right? Let's talk about this for a minute.
Very cool concept.
Because this is starting to really, again, they're in the testing phases. We're talking 50 years in the future. But this right here, as a technology, could change domestic air travel completely. It could turn it on its head.
Well, it will. If this comes to pass, it will change.
And I know there's hurdles. We'll talk about that, and I know you have some counterpoints here in terms of the amount of infrastructure that would have to come online. But we're looking at a fully autonomous and enclosed, module that will go somewhere almost near the speed of sound, 670 miles per hour, in a vacuum tube, basically,
It's
across
a
the country.
pressurized tube, absolutely.
Yeah. And they have an operational goal, at least, to have some test tracks in the mid-2020s, which, again, is not that far away. I think this test track that you look at is out in Nevada desert, and looking at doing it now. But there's been some conceptual routes, again, in the state of Texas, and this was a global challenge that had a bunch of different routes proposed across the world. But one in Texas was a DFW area to Laredo and to Houston and through San Antonio. And they look at a travel time here between traditional other modes of transportation. A car, it could take you 3.5 hours. Airplane, 3:23.
That's assuming a connection.
Right. Well, and I think, again, it's assuming screening times and wait times and that sort of thing. A bus, the traditional rail, 2 hours and 15 minutes. High-speed rail, somewhere in an hour and a half to hour and 50. This Hyperloop, if implemented, would be 25 minutes.
I just can't. 25
so,
minutes.
Again, and then it's the economics of it. But this, to me, as you start looking at that, we already talked about alternative over-the-road coaches.
Right.
There's a couple different brands that are already doing service.
Is something going on now?
Right now, Von Lane is one that's been popularized here out of the Metroplex down to Houston and into Austin, and now they've just added a route that'll start in 2020 from DFW to Oklahoma City. And that directly corresponds with Southwest Airlines pulling some nonstop flights out of Dallas Love to Oklahoma City.
Right.
And so you can go in a business class type of travel environment. You've got Wi-Fi. Your seats are much nicer than what you were just talking about in your air rage
Almost
scenario.
anything would have to be nicer.
And you're there in a relatively amount at the same time. So I think, again, a lot of these different challenges with adding new modes is going to continue to threaten those regional short-haul flights.
Yeah. And my next bold prediction is even with the modern Hyperloop, commercial aviation will be adaptable and it will be strong. And I believe just looking over the history of aviation and seeing it respond to market forces would suggest that they will find a way. You know, certainly regional travel dynamics will absolutely and unquestionably change with the Hyperloop. But the Hyperloop brings about massive capital requirements.
It does. There's no doubt.
Absolutely massive capital requirements. And that's not even looking at the environmental hurdles or anything else going on that might impede development. And to do it to scale, to make a real paradigm-changing influence on regional travel patterns, it'd probably take a century. It'll take 100. It could take 100 years to build that system where it completely changes in the way in which the regional air travel patterns are happening.
That's true. And I know that the capital requirements are not going to be able to be overcome immediately. They're just not. The technology might be there, but it's just not going to be.
And airlines will find a way to adapt, shift, reprioritize. They'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of think
this is my
a bunch of stuff may not happen, so we're doing something else.
And I think as my final bold prediction here that we're going to be colonizing the moon before we see much of this stuff happen. Don't be surprised. That's just right around the corner. NASA expects to resume moon exploration by 2024, and then the next step is the moon to Mars. Moon colonization by 2030. You think of the capital requirements, the changes that could come to aviation in that time. We're going to be back in interstellar travel before so much of this happens.
Well, moon can be our next launching point, right? If we're having to expand
moon to Mars, exactly.
So, and that's what's interesting is getting NASA back involved, but it's also the commercial space interests that we've talked about.
Now, we do have some limiting factors to a few of those things. And one is figuring out, here are the 5 limiting factors to the growth of aviation and what we see. And the first is propulsion. We were in one of the earlier slides, in one of the earlier parts of this discussion, we were talking about the complications to propulsion. And when you get so fast, you've got to take that same internal combustion or jet engine and morph it into something that's an action-reaction rocket engine, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Airframes and airfoil. Well, that's, if you take a look at that, that's technology. The infrastructure to support these things, the economics and the regulatory environment, the environmental considerations, these are all, in my opinion, and I would expect yours as well, to be the limiting factors on where the next steps take us.
Well, if we look at those bold predictions and we say in the next 50 years, they pick 3 of them that did not happen or didn't happen the way we maybe described. Those factors you just listed are probably the reasons why.
Right.
And they always have been, traditionally, the reasons why.
Right.
And over time, you do find ways to improve upon whether it's propulsion or the infrastructure. That it will chip away at those things, and different technologies may come and go. And like you said at the beginning, I think here, Peter, is look what happened since we gave this presentation 3 months ago.
Right.
What's changed. And one thing we didn't get to mention on the electric aircraft side is Rolls-Royce just a day or two ago, over the last week, announced a new technology or 300-mile-an-hour all-electric airplane too. So it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
But those limiting factors, I think, will hold true. Through
so really, if you take these 5 points that we mentioned, you can boil them down to 3 groups. One is technology. The second is economics, and the third is regulatory. Mm-hmm. When those 3 things line up in the heads-up display as Maverick's trying to shoot down the MiG, you're going to have change.
I'm looking for that. That's 2020. We didn't talk about.
We didn't talk
new
about
prediction,
that.
The new Top Gun movie in 2020.
Oh, I can't wait.
That'll be great. Well, I think.
Are you feeling the need for speed?
I am feeling the need for speed, and I think in conclusion, in my opinion, I look at this and say we recommend you hedge your bets, right?
Yep.
And we just don't know where it's going to go, but it's a lot of fun to talk about.
It is fun to talk about, and I especially like talking about it with you.
Well, you too, Peter. I think the excitement, that's the fun of it. It's that joy, that good old joy that I only imagine the Wright brothers had in 1903. It's like, we're at that point again. We're going to see some crazy new stuff happen in our lifetime.
And what's so cool about it is it's outside of our realm of comprehension right now. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our latest podcast. Michael and I have had a lot of fun bringing it to you. We'll continue our series and look forward to talking with you again soon. For KSA Aviation Practice, this is Peter Van Pelt and Michael Maloney saying we'll see you later.
See you later.